What's up? What's going on? So, this is a video that I've thought about making for a long time. Just haven't gotten around to it because I knew that it was something that I'd have to go in on just a little bit. You know, and I wanted to take my time with it a little bit because it's kind of a broad subject, sort of. But, you know, I want to talk about the ELD mandate. If you don't know what the ELD mandate is, Google it. There's lots of information about it on the web. If you're a driver, I'm sure you know about it. It's been pretty big news, especially if you pay attention to what's going on in the industry. The ELD mandate. Paper logs are going bye-bye. The FMCSA or the Department of Transportation or whoever's, probably the FMCSA, has decided that they're done with this whole paper log shit because they're tired of people. Paper logs make it easier to cheat on your hours of service. Now, while it's not impossible to cheat on ELogs, it's a lot more difficult. And so the FMC, the government knows that, so they don't want people skirting the laws anymore. Now, the funny thing about the ELD mandate is, you know, you have certain law, like many laws that get enacted through the government. You know, you have lobbyists for it and lobbyists against it. The lobbyists against it is OOIDA, which is the Owner-Operators Independent Drivers Association or something like that. It's an organization of owner-operators that it's kind of like the NRA for owner-operators. Lobbyists, basically, more or less. And then, you know, they have other functions and stuff like that, but that's mostly what their job is. You know, and they fought this tooth and nail with Congress, I want to say it was, and lost. And, of course, you had lobbyists for the ATA, which is the American Trucking Association, I believe it is, which is an organization of mostly major carriers in the country, and that's their lobbying party, right? The ATA was fighting for the ELD mandate. Now, if you're wondering to yourself, why would an organization that represents private companies of the industry, why would they go to Washington and push for additional regulation? Well, the answer is simply that the ATA represents mega carriers. Mega carriers, most of which are, pretty much all of which are already on ELDs, ELogs. They want this regulation because they want to level the playing field with small fleets and owner-operators that run on paper logs. You know, and it's been told to me that, you know, mega carriers adopted ELogs and stuff like that years ago when they first came out because it was a useful fleet management tool. It made it easier for them to deal with, instead of dealing with thousands of pages of paper logs and having to keep all these damn records, they just have an electronic system that just sends it in data, in computers back to the company. It made it a lot easier to manage the logs of the drivers in the fleet. But the thing about it is, and it also makes them more compliant, you know, so their drivers aren't cheating. You know, but see, running on paper logs and being able to cheat the hours of service regulations, being able to beat the system, has been a competitive edge for small fleets and owner-operators that run on paper logs. And it's been a competitive, like the competitive edge for the mega carriers, that they can run freight for a lot cheaper, especially with these driver mills they're able to run rookie drivers for a lot less, especially when they have an operation where the trainer drives at night and sleeps while the trainee's driving in the daytime or whatever. You know, and they're able to maximize profits off of stuff like that. And they're able, you know, and they, especially when they bring rookies in on like a contract where they're also getting subsidies from the government, but that's another topic for another time. But nonetheless, the competitive edge for these mega carriers is that they can run freight for cheap. They've got lots of trucks. They're able to get by on a smaller profit margin just because of sheer volume. The sheer volume that they're able to run. Smaller fleets do not have that same advantage, especially a single truck operation, an owner-operator, or maybe a 2 or 3 truck operation. So running on paper logs allows them to get around the hours of service regulations, right? So they could run that 18 hours a day, you know, and they could do they could turn over 700 or 800 miles in a day or whatever they want to do. But all that is coming to a screeching, grinding halt on December 18th of this year, which is when the mandate goes into effect. Now, I was talking to a driver yesterday while my truck was in the shop. I finally got my battery problem sorted out. But I was talking to a driver yesterday who told me that because of Trump meeting with industry leaders of the trucking industry and also talking to actual drivers in the trucking industry, that because of that, they're pushing back the ELD mandate to 2019, the end of 2018, which is not what the FMCSA's website reflects. If you go to the FMCSA's website and they have all the information on what's coming up with the ELD mandate and like frequently asked questions, the date from their website is still set to this year, at the end of this year. So the only difference is that they say that if you don't have an ELD on your truck and you have what's called an automatic onboard recording device, an AOBRD, which I'm not really sure what the difference between that and an actual ELD is, but if you have one of those, it gets grandfathered in, but you can only use it up until the end of 2018. Then the industry has to be 100% ELD. So you can look at all that shit on the internet anyway. But you know, I find it very interesting. You know, I like just things like this because I'm a cause and effect kind of guy. You know, so when it comes to things like the economy or regulations and things like that, I'm always interested in, you know, what the effect of is certain causes, you know, government regulations and things like that. You may notice that big yellow flag I have hanging in the back, right? So I do hold certain opinions on overzealous government regulation on particular industries in the country and its effect on private business industries and the economy of the U.S. But nonetheless, you know, I just find this particular subject fascinating on what's going to be its effect on not only the trucking industry, but the economy as a whole. Because the trucking industry is the skeleton of the United States economy, right? Without the trucking industry, any significant effect on the trucking industry is going to affect the entire economy of the U.S. As a whole. Without the only reason that the U.S. has been able to create the infrastructure, support the population that it currently has, and have the economy that it currently has is because of the American trucking industry, right? Without these trucks, everything comes to a stop. Absolutely everything. 100% of the entire country without the trucking industry. So what happens in the industry affects everybody. Every single person on United States soil in one way or another. You know, so I find this to be an interesting topic. Now, you know, since I've been driving, you know, I've been driving a little over 2 years now. I've been on ELogs the whole time. You know, I've been on 2 different types of ELogs from the 2 different companies that I run for. And I've never had much of an issue with ELogs. Yes, there is some annoyances. I do like the fact that I don't have to deal with the paper logs and filling all that shit out. I've done it before. I know how to do it. I know it's not that big of a deal, especially when you do it a lot and you get used to it. But you know, just having the computer being able to do that stuff, you know, is fine with me. It becomes a pain in the ass because even if you're running on paper logs and you're running legally, everything on paper logs is done in 15-minute blocks, right? So, for instance, say, you know, you're running hard and you're just about to run out of time on your drive clock or your 14-hour clock, and you pull into a truck stop and you've got 2 minutes left on the clock, and you drive around this big-ass Pilot or whatever it is, and there's no parking spaces to be had, right? And so you're basically out of time. So if you're on paper logs, you can look at, you know, your truck stop app and say, well, shit, you know what? There's a Petro that's 6 miles down the road that may have some spots or whatever. With ELogs, you can't make it there without accruing a violation on your logs. On paper logs, you can run the 10 minutes or the 5 minutes or however long it takes to get there. You could run down to that Petro, and, you know, maybe there's a spot. You could park there real quick, and it's not a big deal, you know. And then you went over, you know, 5-10 minutes. But on paper logs, you know, it's not a big deal. You don't even mark it down or whatever. You know, you still fell within maybe that last 15-minute block, or maybe you went over a couple minutes, whatever, right? You know, you don't have that flexibility with ELogs. And see, one of the major complaints and one of the major problems that I agree with just about everybody on is that once you start this is what people say, and this is the big problem. What people say is the big problem with ELD is that once your 14-hour clock starts in the morning, it doesn't stop ticking until that 14 hours is run out. And because of that, it puts drivers into a time crunch. And what that means is, if halfway through the day, if we're feeling tired or drowsy and we'd really like to stop and maybe take a nap for an hour or two, we can't do that because this computer is still counting the time. And if we stop for 2 hours to take a nap, that's time we're losing off the clock that we cannot get back. Now, on paper logs, you can cook your numbers. You can edit things. You can tear out a page and rewrite it. And then rewrite that grid as if you started an hour or two later in the day, or have a duplicate book. You know, you can get around certain shit like that. So the paper log guys can stop and take that nap if they'd like to, because they can just edit their paper logs later illegally and all that, but they can still edit their paper logs and drive 2 hours later into the day after they've gotten that power nap. People on ELogs, we don't have that same flexibility, right? But here's my whole perspective on this ELD thing. I don't think ELD is necessarily the problem. Yes, it does have its annoyances. I think that the hours of service regulations themselves are what needs to change, or what needs to be updated. It's not the recording devices. It's not how you record your hours of service. It's the actual hours of service regulations that I have an issue with. You know, like the 30-minute break. I think the 30-minute break is completely fucking pointless and should be eliminated. You know, I think the 34-hour break should be, you know, it should be shortened to maybe 30 hours, 32 or something like that. I think we should be able to, I believe Canada has this, where they, instead of having a 14-hour day, 14-hour duty clock, day clock, they have a 16-hour duty clock. And instead of having an 11-hour drive clock, they have, I think it's a 13-hour drive clock. So they're able to work more during the day. You know, and with a 16-hour on-duty clock, that still gives you a mandatory 8-hour break that you have to take before you can start the next duty clock for the next day. And I think that's more than sufficient. I think you should give drivers, like, look, if the whole issue is about drivers getting enough sleep so they're not driving drowsy during the day, which is what all this is about, you know, make it so that we have to stop for only 8 hours, and if we want to take a longer break than that, we will. You know, we should be able to just stop, run in, go to the bathroom real quick, come back to the truck, go straight to sleep, wake up in the morning, as soon as we get up, pre-trip the truck and get on the road, if we so choose, where we can work the way we want to work, right? And if we want to take a full 10-hour break, you know, take a shower, eat dinner, walk the dog and stuff like that, and take a 9 or a 10-hour break, that's on us. That should be our option. That's just the way I see it. But see, like, that was my big issue with OIDA. You know, they went to Congress, and their whole platform was that the ELD mandate having to be on ELogs is an infringement on, I think, the 4th Amendment, like the right to privacy or something like that. And I can't remember what their precise argument was for that, but I found it to be a weak argument. And when I heard that that's the argument they were going to take to Congress, I said, they're going to fucking lose, because Congress isn't going to buy it. You know, even if they had a sound argument, you're trying to explain the nuances of this argument to people who have never driven a truck, who may understand the rules, maybe, maybe not, but they've never driven a truck and they don't fully understand the dynamics of the job and things like that. So I felt the whole argument was pretty weak. You know what I mean? I think what they should have done is instead of fighting over the ELD mandate, is they should have been fighting for reform on the hours of service regulations. Now, I think I talked about this in another earlier video that I heard at the beginning of the year, that Congress was actually looking to reform the hours of service, and that they had a university doing a study. It was like Penn State or Ohio State University, or they had some sort of university. They contracted them to run certain studies on hours of service and things like that, to figure out what changes they should make, if any, because they were thinking about maybe going back to a rule with the 34-hour reset, to where it has to be between a certain. Once you take your 34-hour reset, you still can't start until it's like a certain time of day, like 6 in the morning or later, or some bullshit like that, which is stupid for guys that run at night. It's completely fucking retarded, because there's a lot of truck drivers that prefer to run at night, and that's mostly what they do, van and reefer guys and stuff like that. That's just a dumb fucking rule, and they got rid of it, you know. And I think maybe they were thinking about bringing it back or whatever, but they were at the beginning of this year going forward conducting studies on whether they should reform hours of service. I don't know what's happened with that. I haven't kept my finger on the pulse of what's maybe been happening with that. I haven't heard anybody talk about it. Of course, you know, Standard News is going to talk about it. The only place you're going to find anything about it is actual trucking news outlets like the Road Dog channel on SiriusXM, where they have trucking news and stuff like that. So, but that's what they really should be doing, is trying to reform actual hours of service instead of, you know, everyone fighting the ELD. Now, with that being said, I've heard a lot of grumblings from different places, the internet, the radio, things like that, actual driver conversations, that there's a lot of drivers out here on the road that have been driving on ELogs for a long time. A lot of these old school truckers that have never run on ELogs. And a lot of these guys, they hate it. A lot of these guys are like, they're kind of anti-computer. They're still rocking the flip phone. They don't want to deal with it. Now, I mean, I get it. I mean, my dad still uses a flip phone. He can barely text. He doesn't even own a computer. He pays half his bills through the mail. I get it. I understand that, you know. I'm not going to fault him for that. You know, ELD's not really that hard to figure out. It's the exact same thing as doing a paper log, but instead of writing everything down, you're tapping on a touch screen. But nonetheless, a lot of these guys, it's not just having to use a computer and the technology and things like that. It's an aversion to, you're clamping down. You're telling it's regulation. This computer right here that is bolted to my dashboard and wired to my truck computer is the boss of me. It tells me what to do. You know, I run off of this computer, you know, and I've said this before, this is one of the beauties of this job and having this as a career, is that, especially when you're over the road or whatever, is even when you have a dispatcher or whatever, you make your own rules out here for the most part. You know, you run the truck the way you want to run it, you drive it the way you want to drive it, you manage your hours the way you like to, things like that. And paper log guys, they really don't have a lot of limits. As long as they know how to, you know, edit their logs and do their paper logs the way they want to, they pretty much just run how they want. You know, and I've seen a lot of these paper log guys that they'll stop late at night, they'll sleep for 6 hours or something like that, and then they're out again, because that's all the sleep they feel they need. Or they know that I'm going to take a power nap later on in the day between loads, I'm good, all 6 hours all I need. Well, once they get a computer strapped to their truck, they're not going to be able to do that stuff anymore. So what I think the effect of this is going to be is you're going to have a lot of drivers that are going to be leaving the industry. I've heard older drivers say this, is that once this happens, they're just going to retire. They're going to move on out. I think you're going to see a lot of older drivers that have just been kind of doing it. They don't really need to do it anymore. They could retire, but they like the job and they like being out on the road. It's what they've always done. I think you're going to start seeing a lot of these drivers retiring and leaving because of this. You know, but also, so you know what? There's going to be an effect on that as far as the industry is concerned. You're going to have a large group of drivers that are going to be leaving the industry, and that's going to have a certain effect on how many trucks are on the road, how many loads there are per truck that are available, things like that, and that's most likely going to have an effect on freight rates. I mean, it's yet to be seen. We'll see what happens, you know, next year. But also, I talked to a guy when I was at a shipper picking up a coil. I talked to a guy who was a coil hauler for a small fleet, and we got to talking. We were waiting to get loaded, and he was telling me that he'd been running since 2 in the morning, and this was like 4 in the afternoon. He's like, I've still got to run to Ohio and stuff like that. So clearly he was on paper logs because he was running this crazy. He ran like 16, 18-hour days and stuff like that. And I was talking to him about the ELD mandate, and he said, between you and me, he says, because he ran for a small fleet, he said, my boss has hired an IT guy, and what we're going to do is we're going to run off of tablets, because you can, when the ELD mandate goes through, you're going to be able to keep your logs on a smartphone or a tablet as long as you're using an application that is certified through the FMCSA. He says, my boss hired an IT guy that's going to be able to go into the computer, and he's going to be able to edit our logs for us so that they're nice and legal, but we can still run the way we want. Which is highly illegal, of course, obviously, but that is something that I have been interested in. And then this guy told me about it, is people, having to get kind of high tech with this, but, having an IT guy going in and fixing the logs, now, I don't know how things are going to work as far as culpability. I don't know what the FMCSA is going to do as far as enforcement of shit like that. Because, and I'm not super well versed on the application for smartphones and tablets, because I'm pretty sure they don't have to be hardwired to the truck, which I originally thought was a requirement for the ELD mandate, is that whatever you had to be connected either by hardwire or through the diagnostic port under the dashboard, directly connected to the truck so that it knows when the truck is driving. But that's not necessarily true. For instance, trucks older than 2000, or a truck that doesn't support an ECM, a computer, is going to have to be on ELD, but it's going to have all the same parameters and stuff like that, but it's not going to be able to know when the truck is driving, right? Likewise, you can have a newer truck, like a glider, with an older engine prior to 2000, where it doesn't have to be hardwired either. That's what I believe I've read on the FMCSA's website. So there are kind of certain ways around actually having a hardwired computer, but still, you're going to have to be on some sort of log. And I don't know if you keep it on a tablet or a smartphone, if it goes off a GPS to know when the truck is moving or not, because you can have a tablet turn off the Wi-Fi or whatever, and it doesn't have any GPS signal at all. So you literally have to type in and tell it where you are. So I could see people maybe getting away with it that way. I don't know. But I have to think the FMCSA, they're going to have to get high tech on how they're going to enforce this stuff. For instance, what's to stop me if I drive like a 1995 truck and I don't have a hardwire? I say I keep my logs on a tablet and my smartphone, and I have 2 different applications that I use, and I use them both together so that I can run longer and skirt the HOS regulations, right? How does FMCSA stop me from doing that? Do they have like some kind of register to what applications I'm using? Like, say that I download 2 different types of hours of service programs. How does the FMCSA know? Like, what if I get 3 different smartphones so I can have 3 different log applications and run that way? How is the FMCSA going to regulate that kind of shit? I think they're gonna realize all this shit after the fact, and they're gonna have to come out with a bunch of additional legislation and laws and shit like that to account for, you know, people figuring it out. You know, people are gonna figure stuff like that out, but you know, I think it's going to have I think it is going to have a certain significant effect on the economy, because it's going to have a significant effect on the industry. One of the big problems people are talking about is parking. Is that now you're going to have all these trucks that are not running on paper logs anymore, not stopping when they want to. Everybody's going to be stopping between 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the afternoon or at night, and so these truck stops are going to be filling up super fast. That's probably something that's going to happen, I guess. But what I think is you're going to have happen is you're going to have a lot of drivers and companies. They're going to start running at night to counteract that, because, you know, they just don't have anywhere to park. So guys that maybe preferred to run in the daytime before are going to have to start running at night. You know, one thing I'm really interested in is how this is going to affect shippers and receivers. You know, especially shippers and receivers that don't allow parking on their premises and stuff like that. How is this going to affect, you know, people picking up loads? Like, I think there's probably a lot of shippers and receivers that are used to maybe running a small fleet that runs on paper logs. They can run. They're expecting that fleet came in and said, "Hey, don't look at that. Don't use the mega carrier. They run on ELogs. I can get your freight. You've got a route, a lane that loads that require 700 miles or 800 miles. I can get them running one day. I can get you 24-hour turnarounds on your loads, because I can get them 800 miles down the road every single day." That shit's going to come to a stop. How is that? And the mega carriers love that shit, because it takes that competitive edge away from the small fleets that are able to do that shit. And I think it is going to choke out a lot of smaller fleets that make their money on running that way. Do I think it's impossible to make money without running? Like, is it impossible to make money running on ELogs? No, it's definitely not. Is it going to be harder for the small fleets? Yeah, it's going to be harder. It is going to level the playing field between the small fleets, the owner-operators, and the mega carriers. You know, but, you know, which is a really shitty thing for your independent owner-operator and your smaller fleets. You know, but it just takes it back. Like, this is the law. This is the law that's in place, whether or not you agree with it, right? So you shouldn't be trying to fight the ELog mandate. You should be trying to fight the actual hours of service regulations. Has OIDA been trying to fight hours of service regulations? Has anybody been trying to fight this, or did they just say, screw it, there's nothing we can do about it? You know, because I think the hours of service themselves is what's at fault. You wouldn't have near as much complaining as if we had better hours of service regulations, if we had reform in that department, you know. But I don't know, it's going to be interesting. This is a real hot button topic with a lot of people in the industry. You know, I have a buddy of mine that one of the guys that I train, I still talked to him the other day. He works for a small fleet, hauls cars now, and he runs on paper logs. And you know, we were talking about it, and I've heard about companies that say that they're not going to run on ELog, or they're just going to keep running on paper logs, and I don't think that's going to last very long after they start racking up citations and, you know, CSA points. But, you know, my buddy who still runs on paper logs, you know, he's making great money and stuff like that, and I told him, well, you know, I can't remember what I told him. I was like, you know, I said, hey, you better enjoy making that money while you can, you know, because he's a company driver and he does good, you know. But I told him, like, hey, man, I'm on ELogs and I make good money as a lease operator. I may not make as much money as some of these owner operators do and stuff like that, but to me, it's good money. I'm making headway on all my financial goals, and I'm doing okay. You know, for the position that I'm in, I'm doing fine. You know, so you're not going to go broke running on ELogs. You're not going to be making as much money as you did on paper logs, right? But I don't know what else really to add to the subject. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it in the comments. yeah, you know, after the ELog mandate goes into effect and we actually see a lot of the results of this, then I'll probably make another video talking about things after it's actually happened. But don't be surprised. January and February, when this goes into effect of next year, there's going to be some growing pains, and it's going to really throw a lot of shit out of whack in the industry until everybody kind of gets used to it. Shippers, receivers, companies, drivers, the whole nine. It's going to screw a lot of shit up for a little while, and I'm interested to see how that's going to affect the economy and the movement of freight in this country for a little while until everybody figures everything out. But we'll see. That's all I got on that for now. I will holler at you guys later.